So we bought 4 pounds of stewing beef, and it kind of comes in these size chunks, but I want the chunks a little bit smaller, so I'm going to cut this down to about 3/4. Roughly this size, 3/4 of an inch size chunk. Doesn't have to be exact, we just want it close enough. So I'm going to cut up this 4 pounds. We bought this earlier, so we had it frozen.
How long has it been frozen for?
Just a couple of months.
Where'd you buy it from?
This is probably from Costco. Some people will actually take stewing beef and stewing pork and do it together. I prefer to have just the beef.
Did Oma ever do it with the pork?
Yes, Oma did it with the pork, and sometimes she would do it with deer meat. She would use venison, because up north they had access to venison. Just say everybody up there would hunt.
Is that a special kind of knife?
No, it's just a knife. Just the sharpest knife I have, cuts through it real quick. You know, any pro chef out there is probably laughing at me for using this stupid knife, but you know what? For me, it works.
You have some countertop contamination there.
It happens.
Here is 4 pounds of stewing beef cut into 3/4 inch cubes.
So we've got our 4 pounds of 3/4 inch beef chunks all cut up. Now we're going to move on to the onions. We're going to roughly use 3 onions because we almost want like a 50-50 mix of onions to beef. I don't know if it's going to be these 3 because they're pretty big onions, or if it'll be 2 1/2 or 2 3/4, but I'm going to cut up all 3 and we'll see how it goes. Finally got our 3 onions peeled here. I'm going to just halve them. And I'm going to slice them in about 1/4 inch or less slices. I'll cut it in half once like this. While we're slicing this, I've added about 2 1/2 tablespoons of vegetable oil to our pot. And I've got that starting to heat up under a medium heat. And I'll continue cutting these onions. Okay, this should be enough. I got about 3 or 2 1/2 of those onions. This looks like it would be a big enough pile. I'll know more when I dump it in after cooking the meat. So the oil's been heating up. Once the oil's hot enough, you can usually tell when the oil's rippling that we've got hot enough oil. And then I'm going to toss the meat in there. Brown salt and pepper and brown that up a little. I think our oil's hot enough because we got some smoke in it, so obviously it's hot enough. So I'm going to start putting the meat in there. And just dump it in there. Kind of peeled myself from this batter.
Is that too hot?
No. We're going to brown it. So as soon as you dump the meat in, the meat is really cold. So the meat will just cool it off. So the cold meat cools the pot off real quick. So we're just going to start browning that. We'll keep that up medium high. What I'm going to do, unfortunately this is an eyeball thing, I am going to take some salt and I'm just going to salt it like that, and I'm going to pepper it sort of the same way. And then I'm going to stir it up. And I'm going to salt and pepper it one more time. Not quite as much. I'm going to add some Maggi. It's a soy sauce. I don't know, it's something my mom and dad, I don't know if this is just something popular with Germans, but it is a soy sauce. Maggie's what we've always used. I'm just going to eyeball a couple splashes in there. It's just to give the meat a little extra flavor. We'll be adding more salt and pepper and Maggi later on once we start making the gravy for it. I'm not going to add a lot right now. So to be honest with you, I'm not sure this is 4 pounds. This seems a little light. Now I'm going to add the onions at this point. And I really won't be adding all these onions because I think we have too much. So I'm going to start with half that pile that we had. So I'm going to add a little bit more. The onions, it seems like I'm adding a lot of onions, but the onions will all cook down and practically disappear eventually, other than the flavor. Just a couple more for good measure. Like I said, you kind of want it to look like it's sort of 50-50. Which I think we're pretty close to that. So we're going to keep cooking this. This is going to get very watery. We're going to keep cooking it at a medium high until all the water has disappeared and the meat starts sticking to the bottom of the pan. And that's probably the worst part about this meal, because that just takes forever. So we're just going to watch it. I'm going to clean up some of my mess that I've made. So you can see it's filling up with water. This is not smoke, this is steam. So all this water will cook away. And that's, I think it's maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. Leave it uncovered, keep stirring it.
Occasionally?
Yeah, stir it occasionally. Near the end, once the water cooks down, then it begins to stick to the bottom of the pan. Then you really got to be there stirring it constantly. Because at that point is when we're getting the meat to go brown.
Alright, so we'll check back in 30-40 minutes.
Okay, as you can see, this really gets filled up with water. And we just keep cooking it down. We're just going to cook this water away. I'm usually stirring it every 5-10 minutes, you know. Right now you don't have to stir it that often. You just want to keep the onions under the water so they cook away. So just keep an eye on it. Every 10-15 minutes you stir it, or less or more. Okay, it's cooking down. We're getting less water. You see it's getting brown. The water's getting browner, a little thicker. It's beginning to stick to the bottom of the pan, just the very beginning though. So we're going to keep cooking at this temp. But you can see how the gravy's getting, the water's starting to get thick and brown. Onions are really starting to disappear. It smells great. This is a super basic meal. It's just kind of time consuming to cook. Add a little bit more salt and pepper. I'm just going to put it in my hand this time because I don't want the steam going into the salt container. So it's not a lot because we're going to be getting more salt from the pickles that I'm going to add later on. And the Maggi is a salty thing, so that adds salt to it. Well, it's really starting to stick to the bottom now. A little more pepper.
you're using a spatula to scrape it.
Yeah. So this is the point where you got to stay on top of it, keep scraping it from the bottom, because this is where a lot of your flavor is going to come from the caramelizing of the onions and the meat. But you don't want it to stick to the pan to where it chars and burns, because you don't want little black flakes of charcoal in your meat. So you got to stay on top of it now and keep it scraped up. Let it brown a little bit, but don't walk away for too long. I'm going to walk away for about a minute here. I got to go grab something, but yeah, don't leave it too long because it'll burn. Okay, you can see that we've cooked down primarily all the water. You can see that the meat has a nice color to it. It's a nice colored brown. It's all scraped up off the bottom. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some water to this. So it's kind of another eyeball thing. I'm going to add enough water to cover maybe an inch over top of the meat. So I'm going to just start filling it with solo cups of water. So I've added 3 solo cups. I believe these are like 12-ounce cups. That's what I've added so far. So I'm going to add some more. I don't know, I've done three and 3/4 of these cups, and I think that's enough gravy. So make sure everything's scraped up off the bottom. We're going to bring this to a boil, and I'm going to cover it, let it stew. It's going to stew for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. The longer it stews, the better. But today we're crunched on a little time, so we're hoping that we can get this cooked in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. I'm going to be adding some flour and water later to thicken it up. I'll add some more Maggi. I'll be adding some paprika, and then the last 45 minutes of the cook, I will add some dill pickles. Okay, we've brought this to a boil. Now we're just going to turn it down to low. We're going to let it simmer. I'm going to throw another little shot of Maggi in there just for good measure. Like I say, this is all eyeball. This will add a little more flavor to the water. Cover it. And we're going to let that simmer. Well, I leave it open a little bit like this. Let some of the heat escape. Okay, I'm going to mix some flour and water. I'm going to take like 4 heaping spoons of flour. And I'm making extra. I just want to have a bunch because if I need it, I'll have it. If I don't, then I won't use it. I'm going to add some cold water to that. Okay, I've added my water to it. Now I'm trying to get all the lumps out. This is kind of tedious. We didn't film the whole thing because it takes forever. But I'm pretty close. It's just about all out. You see it's pretty thick. It's kind of like a milkshake. Okay, looks like all the lumps are out. Now, I ended up adding a little bit more water than what you initially saw. About another half a solo cup or thereabouts, 2/3 of a solo cup. It just looked like we weren't going to have enough gravy. So I add a little bit more. So now I'm going to slowly pour this in. And as I pour, slowly I'm going to mix. So I've added a little bit. I'm probably going to end up adding more. It's looking a little thin, but we'll see how it goes. I want to give it a minute. Sometimes it sneaks up on you and it ends up getting too thick. So we're just going to add, I added probably half to 2/3. I might have a third left of what I mixed up. Like I said, it still looks a little thin. Okay, it's looking a little thin, so it looks like I'm going to go ahead and add more of my roux. That's what it's called. I want it to stick to the ribs, so we'll make it nice and thick. Now the color's gotten a little light. We want a little darker, richer color. So I'm going to add some kitchen bouquet. It's a browning and seasoning sauce. It's almost empty. I hope I have enough.
That was a lot.
Not really. So that gives it some nice color. So now at this point I'm going to add some paprika. Now normally I like to just use regular paprika like this. Unfortunately this is almost empty, so I'm going to add some Hungarian paprika. Mom accidentally got Hungarian thinking it was more European, so it would be more towards this dish, but we like the regular paprika. So I'm going to add this paprika.
Seems like a lot.
Yeah, actually, it's probably good. I probably have enough because you don't need to really add a lot. But I am going to add a little more.
What's the difference between Hungarian paprika and regular paprika?
I don't know. It just smells. It has a little bit different taste to it. This seems a little.
It says sweeter.
Yeah.
Sweet, delicate.
I don't know. It's just different. It comes out with a different color. Just really make sure you mix this stuff up good. We'll let that stew some more.
How much more?
I don't know. I haven't been paying attention to the clock. I think we started somewhere around 4:30. We're at about 6:40. We're probably going to let that stew for another half hour or 15 minutes to a half hour. For some reason it looks a little thin though. I'm hoping it'll thicken as it cooks.
Otherwise you have to add more.
Otherwise I have to add more, and I really don't feel like mixing up more because it's a pain in the ass. Okay, this next step is adding the pickles. And the pickles usually last half hour, last 45 minutes. I like using the Vlasic pickle, and I like the whole pickle. I don't like to buy the spears because the spears can be soggy sometimes. This way, when you have the whole pickle, I cut my own spears out of it because they're a lot firmer. So I will probably use start with about 4 pickles here. And I only have 1 left. But anyways, so I cut these up in quarters. And then I slice them up. Okay, I ended up using only 3 of those pickles. We'll see how this goes. I think this might be enough. Okay, that looks good. I think that's enough. So you're getting the dill flavor, then you're getting more salt flavor. So I'm pretty sure we're not going to have to add any more salt, although I haven't tasted it in a while. Hot water is boiling, not boiling yet. I just turned it on so that while this continues to simmer with the just added pickles for the next half hour or so, the water will begin to boil, and then we'll cook our noodles. I use sort of egg noodles or whatever, but I'm using these traditional German egg noodles, the Spaetzle. Actually, this is a little bit different. Usually we use the little bit wider one, but I wanted to try these this time, so we're going to try these. Okay, I just tasted it. I think it just needs a little more Maggi. And that's kind of the beauty of this dish. You can add to taste your salt or pepper later on. So I'm just going to add a little bit more. And I'm just going to add a little bit more pepper. I think it's pretty good. You know, this is just an eyeball thing. My mom always made it an eyeball thing. She never gave me measurements. And I think if you just season it, like if you were going to season a steak or something, just do that. With all the onions and the pickles, it has this crazy good flavor. It's such a simple dish. It's a little time consuming. You know, you want to give yourself 3 hours. The longer it stews, the more tender the meat gets. That's it. I brought the water to a boil.
And then you turned it down, or you leave it at a boil?
And then once it comes to a boil, once the noodles are in there, I added a tablespoon of salt. Once that boils, then I'll set the timer for 13 minutes. So we like noodles, but some people like mashed potatoes. So this goes great with either one, mashed potatoes or noodles. I prefer the noodles. Renee prefers mashed potatoes. And usually we have peas with it. This time we're trying something different. We're going to have green beans. Just steamed green beans that I'll season with salt and pepper and some olive oil once they're steamed. My Spaetzle noodles. My Spaetzle German egg noodles. Some green beans. These look a little overcooked, but I'm sure they're fine. And a wonderful beef stew. There we have it. Bon appetit.
Yum.